devs, this is Jackie K, and welcome to another editorial on the Pokemon Go Fireside chat. Wasn't gonna divert away from Pokemon Go itself to talk about another Pokemon spin-off series that's near and dear to my heart. And if you thought XD and Coliseum were radically different from the main series games, these ones are so radically different that most people don't even recognize it by the Pokemon name. And this series is known as Golden Sun. And I know that's going to be a super obtuse series, even within the Pokemon community. So allow me to indulge you all in the basic plot summary. The world of Golden Sun takes place in a completely different world from any place that the Pokemon games have ever taken place on. It's much more fantasy oriented than any Pokemon game that's come from past or future. Instead of there being Pokemon trainers, the entire world takes place in a more traditional RPG format where you start out as a single warrior and you meet up with other people who have the ability to wield elements, and they join your party along the way. Depending on the game, it could be a party of 4. Sometimes they have a party of 8, where 4 are active in battles and 4 are in the back. Now, this is a Pokemon game. There are Pokemon in it. They just play a pretty drastically different role from other Pokemon games. They're not even referred to as Pokemon. Instead, to better reflect the world revolving around elements that this game series takes place in, they have a name accordingly. They're known as Ginny. I think it's Ginny, might be pronounced the Gins. These were started out as Game Boy Advance game, and the most recent entry was on Nintendo DS. So this was before there was voice acting. So, if there's an official pronunciation out there, I have to actually Google it. But yeah, instead of capturing the Dingis and using them in battles, and yeah, that is the same kind of Jin as like the genies that you may know as Jins. But while they're not very genie-like in appearance, they do have a lot more focus on the power. Now, what was I about to say before I interrupted myself? Oh yeah, I guess technically you still capture the genies. Jin, however we're pronouncing it. But instead of actually using them to fight against other genies, they help you enhance your own strengths and powers. Before I go into the whole Genie mechanic, because that's honestly the most innovative thing about the Golden Sun series. There's 2 things that really make me fall in love with the series. That's the class customization that the whole Jin mechanic brings out, and just the way that they implement puzzle solving into the powers you have. Like, there is an alternate universe out there where instead of taking away 8 gem moves, they kind of have a system similar to this. But let me backpedal a bit. Before I explain the Genies, I have to explain a little bit more about how this world works. It's very focused around alchemy, and as such, there are 4 major elements: fire, water, earth, and wind. They're also alternately known as Mars for fire, Mercury for water, Wind for Jupiter, and Venus for Earth. Yeah, the Pokemon types of pretty much every Pokemon game. In fact, I know of every Pokemon game and the majority of spin-offs is completely null and void in the world of Golden Sun. They've either all been combined into one type, like rock and ground being, and even grass all being part of the Venus-Earth element, or completely gone, like I don't think there's really any fairy type equivalent. Normal is kinda in there because on top of all the enemies you face in the game being of one of 4 types, they could also just be of none of the types. But more on that later. Not only do the Genies fall under one of these 4 elemental types, the characters that make up your party Because, mind you, this is like a traditional RPG and not Pokemon RPG. The people themselves fight against all the monsters and foes that they come across along the way, and the Genies just help them out. They all have an element. I am kind of dumbing it down a bit, because, well, they don't exactly have an element, as much as they have certain elemental strengths and resistances. Throughout the game's story, they're strongly associated with one element or another. For example, the main characters of both the first and second game are well associated with the Venus element, though through the power of the Genies, you can customize all your characters to have more of an elemental strength towards one element or another. It's very hard to typecast them, to be perfectly honest, but I'm going to do so just for the sake of simplicity. And the fact that they're not the hardest RPGs in the world. Might be a little bit more difficult than Pokemon games, especially if you play on hard mode, but still like a fairly good entry point into more traditional RPGs. But man, I could spend a whole day and a half just talking about the Genie customizations. As you travel across the land on your journey, you'll come across the Genies throughout your adventure. So, very occasionally they'll just appear randomly in battle, but most of the time you just find them hanging out in the overworld, in towns, and in the dungeons that you face along the way. When you encounter them, one of two things happen. Usually if you're in a peaceful area like a town, they'll just join you completely voluntarily. But usually if you come across them in a dungeon or the overworld, they'll attack you and you have to battle against them to prove your worth. Once you have proven your worth, they'll join your party. But man, the customization with the Genie is where it really gets fun. As I was kind of alluding to before, all the characters that you control do have a major elemental association. But by giving them certain Genies of certain elements, you can change their class completely. When you change the character's class, like the stats that they have change, as well as the synergy. Synergy being the elemental powers that our heroes can use, drawn from the same source as the Genie, aka the Pokemon in this case. In fact, in this world, it's believed that Pokemon are just embodiments of the elemental powers that pretty much breathe life into this entire world. But back to the class customization. Let's say, for example, I have an Earth guy. He uses a lot of grass and ground moves and stuff with nature and that. If I were to give him a couple fire Genies or two, I can completely change the synergy that he uses into something more fire oriented. There's even some real crazy classes that allow you to do incredibly odd things with a certain combination of Genies. For example, if I give a certain character a certain combination of Genies, I can actually turn them into a ninja, or a mage, even a monk. I mean, it doesn't physically change them in those things, but their synergy really revolve around being in those class. Like, there's a bunch of ninja-like moves that the ninja class can learn. And a real interesting thing about this all, you can actually use the Genies in battle directly. Like, I'll take Flint as an example. He's probably the most iconic Genie in the entire world of Golden Sun. He's the closest that we're going to get to Pikachu for a while. I could be using Flint on my fire elemental character. On top of supporting my character to change their class and boost their stats in general, Flint can attack an enemy directly. But if Flint does this, he'll go from his set state, where he actually supports the character the most, into a standby state. More on that later, but what I want you to take away from this is, if he doesn't attack, and there's not enough Earth Genies to support the Earth class this fire wielder has, there's a chance that they'll go back to being a fire wielder. So you could change your class mid-battle if you strategically use your Genie. Say you want your fire wielder to be an Earth wielder again. How do I get Flint back to his set state so he can actually support his allies? Well, you could just directly change them from the standby state to the set state, but a much more interesting way to do it is summoning. If you're familiar with more traditional RPGs and how you can summon super mega monsters to pretty much nuke your foes, it's kind of similar to that in Golden Sun. If I were to just do a summon with Flint being the only genie on standby, I just do a standard Venus summon. But if I have 2, or should I say 3 other Earth genies on standby alongside Flint, I do the much more powerful Judgment summon. They expand on this in the sequels of Golden Sun, where you can actually find summon tablets throughout the world and be able to do summons of multiple elements, like one of a fire and earth element together. And usually these special summons that you find on the overworld have secondary effects, like I believe the earth fire one I described can give you an attack boost. There is a downside to summoning. You can't just constantly summon your genies from standby forever. Once you do a summon, the genies go into a recovery state. In this state, they are completely useless to you and your allies. You can't summon them, they can't support your allies. It usually takes about 2 to 3 turns. I think it depends on exactly how many of your genies are sitting on standby, or in recovery as well. Because in battle, you'll get a genie back from recovery into a traditional set state once per turn. So let's say I have a party member that has 4 Venus genies, Earth genies, I should say, all together, and I do that Judgment summon that I described earlier. It would basically take me 4 turns in order to get all those genies back into the set state, and if I want to summon them again, I would have to use their attacks to put them back into a standby state to summon them. And as I do that, my stats would adjust accordingly. Like, if they're all in set, I would be pretty buff. But if they're in standby waiting to summon, those buffs go away. I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. It's a lot easier to describe with a visual format, but we're podcasting this, so I'm doing my best. I should mention this, because this is more like a traditional RPG. You don't have to rely completely on your genies. As I alluded to, the party members that hold on to the genies for you have elemental powers themselves and can attack with weapons. The genies just have a major influence on exactly what elemental attacks you can use at what times. But you're never completely helpless. You do kind of have your own mana bar. So you can cast your own spell-like attacks with the elemental powers that the characters have, and defeat the monsters that way as well. I think that's just part of the beauty of Golden Sun. There's so many different ways to play. You can, if you really want to, just be focused on using the genies, summoning them, and focus most of your attacks that way. Or you could just leave your genies on set to give your characters more powerful attacks to use, and better stats to actually take in attacks and so forth. There's a bit more to all the combat to this, but like I said, I could spend a whole day just talking about the genie system. So let me take a minute to backpedal back to the other factor that I really enjoy about Golden Sun. Or should I say, it's not the only other factor I enjoy about Golden Sun, but I think it's the other factor that really makes this series unique. And that's with the puzzle solving. Granted, a lot of RPGs have puzzle solving elements to them, where you just have to push blocks around in that. But what I find really cool about Golden Sun is the fact that the elemental powers you use often play a role in the overworld in solving said puzzles. It's not as amazing that I'm making it stand out, because usually there's separate side energy magic moves that you use on the overworld compared to the ones you use on battle. But there are some that actually intertwine that can be used in both puzzle solving and in battles. For example, there's a move called Whirlwind that you use outside of battles to blow away bushes and leaves blocking your path. But you can also use it in battle. It's especially useful real early on as a wind attack. And I know those of you Pokemon fans who have been long around with the main series long enough to actually see how HM moves apply know the biggest problem with the HM moves is the fact that you can't get rid of them. They don't go away. How Gold and Sun gets around this is that it's not relying on having a fixed amount of moves. Every move you learn, you're able to use at any point in the game. A la like a traditional RPG where you just learn spells along the way, and as you get stronger, you may just get stronger versions of said spells. Like Whirlwind I use as an example. While you use it outside of battle for the entire course of the game, eventually you get stronger versions of that spell. Wow, it's been so long since I played it last. I'm blanking on exactly what they're called, but it's kind of like fairly obvious. Like Whirlwind may upgrade the Tornado, and I think like Tempest might be an upgrade from it to that. But you can use that weaker version of the spell if you whatever please at any point in the game. Just usually there's not really a reason to, even though the weaker spells are technically cheaper and cost less mana, aka Synergy, to use. And like I was alluding to, I can imagine an alternate universe where HM moves work fairly similarly. You can use them outside of battle, but they don't take up one of your precious move slots. I can imagine certain Pokemon, especially ones that can learn a lot of TMs and HMs, being a bit broken in the competitive scene if they got more move options than other Pokemon, which is probably why it was for the best that they just got rid of HMs altogether. But like I said, another world, I definitely could see that path going forward. Now, I'm not sure if it's a concern anyone has, but I know other me is telling me, but Jackie K, if you can use your magic outside battles and need to solve certain puzzles, and when you have to worry about running out of mana and getting stuck, well, that's the brilliant thing about Golden Sun. When you're outside a battle, you actually regain Synergy just from walking around. Granted, I think there's certain areas you do and certain areas you don't. There's the other factor that usually Synergy moves that you need to use to solve puzzles are very cheap compared to the magic spells that you use to attack enemies. Especially later on in the game when you got much more powerful moves. Now, with all this talk about just how much more different of a tone that this game has compared to a Pokemon game, I should probably go over the story. It might not sound that impressive from an RPG fan's perspective, but it's got some charm to it. You begin your adventure in a small village of fellow people who can wield elemental powers. And your village is kind of actually the guardians of a Sachem, or a temple dedicated to the elements themselves. One day, some intruders sneak their way in, and you, your friends, and an old man just happen to be going into this temple on a field trip. An unofficial, maybe not permitted field trip into this temple. As you might expect, the paths of our heroes and the intruders intertwine within the deepest section of the Sachem, where the sources of the elements themselves lay in rest. You see, a long time ago before the game even started, a bunch of old people sealed away the powers of the elements themselves, out of fear that people would misuse them and destroy the world itself. And of course, these mysterious intruders want the stones that seal away those powers and take them back to the structures that unseal the power. And through that process, you lose the best character in the game and the old man that nobody missed to these intruders. And you're forced to go on throughout your adventure without them. Also, I left this out because I'm not sure if I wanted to spoil it or not, but I guess it is fairly important to the plot to ignore. What I forgot to mention is the game doesn't start on this unofficial field trip. That actually happens in a flash forward about 3 years later. At the very beginning of the game, you start out as a very young child when your village is in a major tragedy. there's apparently a giant boulder that's on top of the Sachem, the temple, and it's coming down to crash down the building. Like, old people with really high amounts of elemental powers are the only thing keeping the boulder from falling down and killing everyone. So there's just a mad rush to get everyone to safety and all that. And in the process of all that, somehow a child falls into the water. So on top of getting everyone to safety, we have to find someone who didn't expend all their elemental energy trying to help everyone else to save this kid. And in the process, we meet up with the intruders that I alluded to early on. They are immensely powerful, so they wipe the floor with us little kids. And that giant boulder I was talking about falls down, coincidentally right on top of this dock where everyone's trying to save the kid. And everyone dies. The kid, his parents, who coincidentally are the parents and brother of one of the party members, along with our main hero's father, were all right there where that stupid boulder came down and wiped us all out. And then we get a flash forward to 3 years later and we're caught back up to inside the temple. I bring all this up because, plot twist, one of the mysterious intruders turns out to be that kid who we could have sworn freaking died from a giant falling boulder, but nope. He's alive and working for the bad guys now. And so begins our adventure. It's a very long prologue, to be perfectly honest. It's not just that I had a real long explanation for it. It does take a while to actually get to the point in the game where you meet Flint, the first Ginny, and the adventure truly begins. But honestly, I would not take it back for the world. The biggest flaw of Golden Sun is that it can get extremely wordy at times. But then again, that's something a lot of RPGs struggle with. And I think all this build up in the prologue is definitely worthwhile later on in the plot. So begins our adventure to not only get our friends and I guess the old man back, but to beat these intruders to the structures that the elemental stones will reawaken each of the elements into the world. Now, I thought I could get through this whole commentary without diving into any names, but to keep things simple, our main hero we'll refer to as Isaac. The one friend who didn't get kidnapped, unfortunately, is Garrett. And we meet two other heroes along this first game adventure. In the nearby village, we meet up with a wind elemental user known as Ivan. I'm just going to refer to them as adepts from now on because that's what the game refers to them as. And oddly enough, on top of wielding the wind, he has the power to read minds. So yeah, there's a whole thing with NPCs. Like another cool little unnecessarily extra feature of Golden Sun. Pretty much every NPC you can mind read once Ivan joins the party. And you can get a lot of backlog. Like, you know how games these days often have like little journals you can find to get a little bit more lore and background on certain characters. Now, in this game, you just freaking read their minds, and that's how you get all your little extra dialogue. It's pretty cool. We go through, and eventually we reach the first elemental structure, aka the elemental lighthouse. Our first lighthouse is of the element Mercury, and in the process we meet up with a healer of the local village, known as Mia. Eventually she joins our side for the adventure, and we reach the top of the first lighthouse. There's some exchanges, revelation that a close associate of Mia betrayed everyone to join up with the bad guys. There's a scrimmage, but unfortunately we're not unable to stop the lighthouse from being lit, and we have to continue to chase the bad guys to get our friends and etc. Whole bunch of other things happen throughout our adventure, and eventually we reach the Venus Lighthouse at the very end of the first game. This poor girl known as Sheba gets thrown into a bunch of shenanigans. She comes from a village known as Lavrado that actually worships her because she fell from the sky or something. It honestly doesn't get explained too much. Just gives her a reason to be mysterious in the second game, I guess. But it's okay, because I feel way too bad for her to actually give that plot line crap. She gets kidnapped by some rich dude that's actually not a bad guy, believe it or not. It's a political kind of kidnap. Like, it's pseudo-ransom, but by the way the US politics would do it. So it's legally okay, but not really. They're just legally able to get away with it. In order to build a Venus Lighthouse-like structure, I guess they want to get into the Venus Lighthouse by building a structure like a Venus Lighthouse right next to it. When I actually am reading this out loud, I just realized there's a lot of parts of Golden Sun that I just chose to ignore. Anyways, I'm only bringing this up because if it's not bad enough for this poor Sheba that, like, she's caught up in this political tangle between her home village and some old dude that wants to live and be immortal. Yeah, more on the next game when he actually becomes an asshat without actually becoming a villain. But the actual bad guys we've been chasing kidnap her, like really kidnap her, not the political kidnap her, but like kidnap her. To get into the Venus Lighthouse, which is a little confusing because she's not a Venus adept. And up to this point, we learned that every elemental lighthouse revolves around the powers of each an adept of that particular element. So, like, you need a Venus adept. We need a Mercury adept in order to really get through the Mercury Lighthouse, which was a nice coincidence that we ran into Mia right when we needed her. And Venus Lighthouse is not an issue because our main character is a Venus adept. But yeah, there's another skirmish on the very top of the lighthouse. The two bad guys team up, we fight them for real. They actually are defeated. And through some Deus Ex Machina BS, I'm sorry, the political thing I was able to let, the convoluted stuff before I was able to slide, but this is kind of like, they pulled this out of their butt last minute. Despite being fire adepts, they're able to pull through the power of the Venus Lighthouse to turn into a giant two-headed dragon to try to kill us. And they write it off as saying, oh, Venus and Mars are akin. They're similar enough to actually draw powers from each, which mechanically is BS, because in the Mercury Lighthouse, our Mercury adept actually got stat benefits, like got mana back every turn just from being in the Mercury Lighthouse. There's no BS like that. Like, are you also saying that wind and water are similar as well? Because spoilers, they kind of do. And there's no, my wind adept was not getting any benefit from being in the Mercury Lighthouse. Nor was freaking Garrett, our fire adept, getting any benefit from being in the Venus Lighthouse. They just really wanted to pull an excuse to do the giant dragon thing, I guess. Nevertheless, we're able to defeat the giant dragon, and that kills the bad guys for real. Unfortunately, our friends, by which I mean Fren, the old man, and the little kid, who started working with the bad guys, still aren't fully convinced to come back with us. Or should I say at this point, the old man and our friend, the good character, didn't come up to the Venus Lighthouse, so we can't do anything about them. So it's just Felix, the little kid, and Sheba. Felix refuses to let down, still determined to light the lighthouse despite the fact that the kidnappers are dead. And as we were arguing it out, if there was any room to talk, we don't get a chance to actually do so, because there's just delay in the lighthouse causes tremors to the point that knock both Sheba and Felix off the lighthouse, like yeet, right off the side of the building. So unfortunately, Sheba's not freaking catching a break, it seems. But with everyone that was planning to light the lighthouse is dead, we can at least conclude at this point that it's perfectly safe to assume that no one's gonna bother lighting the rest of the lighthouses. So the first part of our Golden Saga ends with our heroes getting a bolt from that old guy that I talked about before that had the politics involving with Sheba, who's totally not an asshole, giving them a ship to go search out for our friend Jenna and the old man, I guess. Because this story truly can't have a happy ending until Jenna is safe. Or that would be the end, but after the credits we find out the whereabouts of the old man and Jenna on this island that's just floating and sailing like a boat for some reason. And what do you know? Washed up on the beach of this landmass that's just flowing down for some reason, we find Felix and Sheba. And that's where the second game begins. Wow. Just that poor plot synopsis. I'm sorry. Half of that was intentionally a bad plot synopsis. For humor's sake, half of it was kind of like, but I can't leave out these details. I like this game too much to not do it justice, despite it not being Pokemon. Yeah, April Fools. I was not gonna fool anyone, but I might as well clarify. This isn't actually a Pokemon game. But I hope at least the beginning of it all kind of like gives you an idea of what I enjoy about both Golden Sun and Pokemon. I think they actually have more things in common than people give it credit for. Like which is why I think I like both of them. Like, they both have that collection aspect. There's fun things you do with the mechanics of the game. They are very, very different, yes. But I can see why I found myself drawn towards these two games over more traditional RPGs, just through the class customization features of Golden Sun itself. So, I mean, I was originally planning on just summarizing all of the Golden Sun series, but I spent a long time just talking about the first game as is. So, I'm going to leave it up to the people. If you all want to see more of my generalizations of the Golden Sun series, let me know, and I'll consider, like, substituting in one of the editorial slots. Maybe I don't even have to do that. Maybe instead of, like, doing an up-team battle commentary or something, like, I'll find a way to make it work into the schedule. Especially because now I have battle commentaries on a Tuesday slot. There's probably I've been doing Game Show a lot less than before. There's probably a way to fit a bonus video like this, or a bonus podcast like this, without taking away from any of the other content I do. I just have to see if people actually are interested in hearing more about this. Especially because I'm still procrastinating the whole podcast on Pokemon XD that I've promised so long ago when I did the overview on Pokemon Coliseum. Oh hey, before we go, I got a tiny fun bit of trivia relating to this podcast that'll also justify the whole fact of spending a whole podcast talking about this video game that has nothing to do with Pokemon Go. The intermission music you sometimes hear when they have to break away for the podcast, that's from Golden Sun. Granted, there's a chance that it might also be from Golden Sun The Lost Age. It's been a hot minute since I've actually used that intermission music. But yeah, I actually pull a lot from Golden Sun when it comes to the podcast, as well as battle videos. Like, you might have occasionally heard a non-Pokemon related thing when I need background music for a battle video. Odds are it was from Golden Sun. And now whenever you see Golden Sun in the credits of him, when when I'm including music in a battle video, you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. Thanks to this podcast. Now for real though, take care. If you like what you heard though, even though it's not the Pokemon content that you sign up on this podcast for, let me know. I appreciate all feedback. I'm only a person too, so I can definitely use the ego boost every now and then. Now let me go get this edited, just make sure I can get this up by April 1st. But until we meet again, take care.